The old wooden chair creaked under Robert's weight as he sat at his kitchen table, staring at the empty seat across from him. 6 months had passed since Linda's funeral, but her absence still hit him like a punch to the chest every morning. The coffee in his hands had gone cold again, just like it did every day when he got lost in memories. At 52 years old, Robert thought he had life figured out. He worked at the local factory, came home to his wife, and they dreamed about the children they never had. Now those dreams felt like cruel jokes. The doctors had tried everything, but kids just weren't in the cards for them. Linda used to say they were complete just being together. She was wrong about that, but Robert never told her. Now he wished he had. The apartment felt too big and too small at the same time. Too big because Linda's laughter no longer filled the rooms. Too small because everywhere he looked he saw reminders of her. Her favorite mug still sat in the cabinet. Her books were still stacked by the window. Her side of the bed remained untouched, as if she might come back and slip under the covers like nothing had happened. Robert's routine had become as predictable as clockwork. Wake up at 5:30 a.m., make coffee for 2 out of habit, then pour half down the drain. Eat toast that tasted like cardboard. Drive to the factory where he spent 8 hours lifting, moving, and fixing things that were easier to repair than his broken heart. Come home to silence. Heat up whatever was easiest for dinner. Fall asleep watching television shows that Linda used to love. The worst part wasn't the loneliness during the day. He could keep busy at work, talk to his co-workers about sports or weather, and pretend everything was normal. The worst part was coming home to an apartment that echoed with emptiness. No one to ask about his day. No one to share a meal with. No one to laugh at his terrible jokes or roll their eyes when he left his work boots by the door. His neighbors probably thought he was doing fine. Robert was good at putting on a brave face. He nodded hello in the hallways, picked up his mail without making eye contact, and kept his grief locked away like a secret shame. But at night, when the building settled into quiet and other families were tucking their children into bed, Robert felt the weight of his solitude pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. Money was another constant worry. Linda's medical bills had eaten through most of their savings. The life insurance helped with the funeral costs, but there wasn't much left over. Robert's factory job paid the rent and kept food on the table, but just barely. He had to be careful about every dollar, counting coins for groceries and skipping meals when money got tight toward the end of the month. Sometimes he stood by his living room window and watched the children playing in the courtyard below. Their laughter drifted up to his third-floor apartment like music he couldn't quite remember how to play. Young mothers pushed strollers while toddlers chased pigeons. Fathers taught their sons how to throw a baseball. Families that looked so effortless, so natural, so complete. Robert wondered what it would have been like to have little feet running across his floors. What it would have been like to help with homework at the kitchen table, or read bedtime stories in funny voices. He and Linda had picked out names years ago, back when they still believed it might happen. They had planned birthday parties and imagined first days of school. Now those plans felt like relics from someone else's life. The evenings were the hardest. That's when the apartment felt most empty, most quiet, most wrong. Robert would heat up a frozen dinner and eat it standing at the counter, too tired to bother setting the table for one person. He tried watching the news, but the world outside seemed too big and too complicated. He tried reading, but the words swam together on the page. Mostly he just sat in his chair and listened to the sounds of other people's lives happening around him. His co-workers meant well when they suggested he should get out more, maybe try dating again. They didn't understand that Robert wasn't just missing a wife. He was missing the future they had planned together. He was missing the family they never got to build. He was missing the person he used to be when he had someone to be that person for. Some nights Robert lay in bed and wondered if this was it. If this quiet, careful existence was all he had left. He wasn't old, but he felt ancient. He wasn't sick, but he felt broken in ways that doctors couldn't fix. He had a roof over his head and food in his stomach, but he was slowly starving for something he couldn't name. The worst part was how normal it all felt now. 6 months ago, the silence had been deafening. Now it was just background noise. 6 months ago, eating alone had felt impossible. Now it was routine. He was adapting to a life he had never wanted, and that scared him more than the loneliness itself. Robert finished his cold coffee and rinsed the cup in the sink. Tomorrow would be the same as today. Wake up, work, come home, exist. He had accepted this as his reality, settled into it like an old coat that didn't fit quite right but was too familiar to throw away. He had no idea that everything was about to change with a knock on his door that would come at the worst possible time and offer him the one thing he had given up hoping for. He had no idea that his quiet, careful life was about to be turned upside down by two small voices and a desperate woman's impossible request. But that night, Robert just went to bed in an apartment that felt too big and too small, carrying the weight of a solitude that had become his only companion. The knock came at 11:17 p.m., sharp and urgent against Robert's apartment door. He had been dozing in his recliner, the television casting blue shadows across the room while some late-night movie played to an audience of one. The sound startled him awake, and for a confused moment he thought he might have imagined it. Who knocked on doors this late? Robert's mind immediately went to bad news. Maybe something had happened to his elderly neighbor down the hall. Maybe there was an emergency in the building. He shuffled to the door in his house slippers and peered through the peephole. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was a woman he recognized but didn't really know. Carol Williams lived somewhere in the building with her husband and his two daughters from a previous marriage. Robert had seen her in the elevator a few times, always dressed like she was heading to an important business meeting, always checking her phone with an impatient expression. But tonight Carol looked different. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back carelessly, and she kept glancing over her shoulder like she was being followed. Behind her, barely visible in the hallway's weak lighting, stood two small figures. Robert opened the door with the chain still attached. "Is everything okay?" Carol's smile was too bright, too forced. "Hi, Robert, right? From 3B? I'm Carol from 3F. Listen, I know this is going to sound strange, but I have a huge favor to ask you." Through the crack in the door, Robert could see the two girls more clearly now. They looked to be around 8 or 9 years old, obviously twins with the same dark hair and big eyes. They stood close together, each holding a small backpack that looked like it had seen better days. Their clothes were too thin for the October cold, and they both looked like they hadn't slept in days. "I'm in a really tough spot," Carol continued, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality that made Robert uncomfortable. "My husband died a couple of years ago, and I've been raising his girls on my own. But I just got a job opportunity in another state, and I need to leave tomorrow morning. The thing is, I can't take them with me right away." "It's complicated," Robert frowned. Something about this didn't add up. If she had a job opportunity, why wasn't she excited? Why did she look nervous instead of happy? And why were two young children standing in a hallway at nearly midnight? "I've been asking around the building, and everyone says you're a good guy," Carol went on. "Quiet, responsible, you know. I was wondering if you could watch the girls for a little while, just until I get settled and can send for them. A few weeks, maybe a month at most." One of the twins, the slightly taller one, tugged on Carol's coat. "I don't want to stay with a stranger," she whispered. But in the quiet hallway, Robert heard every word. Carol's hand moved to the girl's shoulder, and Robert noticed how the child flinched slightly. "Now, Amy, we talked about this. Mr. Robert seems very nice, and it's only temporary. What about their school?" Robert asked, still not opening the door fully. "Their friends? Don't they have other family?" "Their grandparents are too old to handle kids," Carol said quickly. "And the school thing will work itself out. Look, I know this is a big ask, but I'm really desperate here. I wouldn't be knocking on your door at this hour if I had any other choice." Robert looked at the twins again. The quieter one, who must be Lucy, had tears in her eyes that she was trying hard not to let fall. Amy was holding her sister's hand so tightly that her knuckles were white. Neither of them looked like children who were about to have a fun sleepover at a neighbor's house. "They looked scared. Have they eaten dinner?" Robert found himself asking. Carol waved a hand dismissively. "They're fine. Kids are resilient, you know. They adapt quickly." That wasn't what Robert had asked, and they both knew it. He studied Carol's face more carefully. There was something brittle about her smile, something desperate that had nothing to do with the job opportunity, and everything to do with wanting these children gone. "What about money for food, clothes, anything they might need?" "Like I said, it's just temporary. I'll send money once I'm settled." Carol shifted from foot to foot. "Look, I need to get going. I have a lot to pack tonight. Can you help me out or not?" Robert's heart was pounding. This woman was basically asking him to take care of two children he didn't know, with no guarantee she'd ever come back for them. It was crazy. It was possibly illegal. It was definitely not something he should agree to. But then Lucy made a small, scared sound and Amy whispered, It's okay, Luce. We'll be okay. The way Amy said it broke Robert's heart. She sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as her sister. She sounded like a little girl who had learned not to expect adults to take care of her. Robert thought about his empty apartment, his silent dinners, his routine that stretched ahead of him like a long, lonely road. He thought about Linda, who would have already opened the door and invited the girls in for hot chocolate. He thought about the children he and Linda never had, and wondered if maybe this was some kind of strange second chance. Okay, he heard himself saying, and he was as surprised as anyone. Okay, they can stay for a little while. Carol's relief was so obvious it was almost insulting. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to me. But as Robert finally opened his door and watched two frightened children shuffle into his apartment with their small backpacks and uncertain faces, he was pretty sure he knew exactly what it meant to Carol. It meant freedom from a responsibility she had never wanted. And for Robert, it meant his quiet, predictable life was about to become something else entirely. The sound of Carol's car engine fading into the night left a silence that felt different from any Robert had experienced in the past 6 months. This wasn't the empty quiet of being alone. This was the careful, watchful quiet of two children who didn't know if they were safe. Amy and Lucy stood in the middle of his living room like statues, still clutching their backpacks. They looked around the apartment with wide eyes, taking in the simple furniture, the photos of Robert and Linda on the side table, the general tidiness of a man who had nothing but time to keep things organized. Are you hungry? Robert asked, because it seemed like the most practical place to start. I have some crackers, or I could make some toast. Both girls shook their heads, but Robert noticed Lucy's stomach growl softly. They were hungry, but they were also too scared or too polite to admit it. How about something to drink? Water, milk? Water would be nice, Amy said quietly, speaking for both of them. Robert went to the kitchen and filled 2 glasses, grateful for something to do with his hands. When he came back, the girls were still standing in exactly the same spot, as if they were afraid to move without permission. You can sit down, he said gently, setting the glasses on the coffee table. Make yourselves comfortable. They perched on the edge of his couch like birds ready to fly away at the first sign of danger. Lucy immediately picked up her water and drank half of it in one go, confirming Robert's suspicion that they were more than just hungry. So, Robert said, settling into his recliner and trying to figure out how to talk to children. Carol said your dad passed away. I'm really sorry about that. Amy nodded solemnly. 2 years ago. He was working on a building and fell. The matter-of-fact way she said it made Robert's chest tight. No 8-year-old should have to talk about losing a parent like she was discussing the weather. That must have been really hard, Robert said. Carol didn't cry. Lucy spoke up for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. We thought she would be sad like us, but she just made a lot of phone calls. Amy shot her sister a warning look, but Lucy continued. She said we were too expensive and too much trouble. Lucy, Amy hissed, but the damage was done. Robert felt something cold settle in his stomach. Too expensive? Amy looked down at her hands. She didn't mean it like that. She's just stressed about money and stuff. But Robert could tell by the way Amy defended Carol that she had heard much worse things than that. Children who made excuses for adults were children who had learned that adults weren't always going to protect them. When did you last eat a real meal? Robert asked gently. The sisters exchanged a look. Yesterday morning, Amy admitted. But we had crackers today. Robert stood up so quickly that both girls flinched. I'm just going to make you something to eat, he said quickly, raising his hands to show he wasn't angry. What do you like? I have some pasta, or I could make grilled cheese sandwiches. We don't want to be any trouble, Amy said, and Robert realized she had probably been saying that a lot lately. You're not trouble, Robert said firmly. You're hungry kids, and hungry kids need food. That's not trouble, that's just life. He went to the kitchen and started pulling out ingredients for grilled cheese, trying to process what he was learning. Carol hadn't just asked him to watch her stepchildren for a few weeks. She had abandoned 2 grieving, hungry children with a stranger because she didn't want to deal with them anymore. While the sandwiches cooked, Robert listened to the quiet conversation happening in his living room. Do you think she's really coming back? Lucy whispered. I don't know, Amy whispered back. But even if she doesn't, we'll figure it out. We always do. I miss Daddy. I know, Luce, me too. Robert had to stop stirring the soup he was heating and take a deep breath. These children had been taking care of each other, probably for longer than just the past 2 years. Amy was acting like a little mother to her sister, and Lucy was trying so hard to be brave. When he brought them the food, they ate like they hadn't seen a meal in days, which was probably closer to the truth than Robert wanted to think about. They said thank you after every bite, used their napkins carefully, and asked permission before reaching for seconds. You don't have to ask permission for food, Robert told them. If you're hungry, you eat. That's the rule in this house. After dinner, he showed them where the bathroom was and found some clean towels. I don't have kids' pajamas or anything like that, he said apologetically, but I have some old t-shirts you could use for tonight. We have our clothes, Amy said, patting her backpack. We're used to taking care of ourselves. When Robert looked inside their backpacks while they were getting ready for bed, his heart sank. Each bag contained 3 changes of underwear, 1 extra shirt, a pair of jeans with holes in the knees, and a small stuffed animal that had seen much better days. That was it. That was everything these children owned in the world. He made up the couch with his best sheets and pillows, but the girls insisted they could share. They were used to sharing everything, they said. They curled up together under the blanket like puppies, Amy's arm protectively around her sister. Mr. Robert, Lucy's voice was small in the dark room. Yes? Are you going to send us away tomorrow? Robert was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. You can stay as long as you need to. Even if Carol doesn't come back. Even if Carol doesn't come back. He heard Lucy sigh, a sound of relief that was heartbreaking from someone so young. Thank you, she whispered. Robert sat in his chair long after the girls fell asleep, watching their small forms rise and fall with each breath. 6 hours ago, he had been a lonely widower eating dinner alone and watching late-night television. Now he was responsible for 2 children who had been failed by every adult in their lives. He had no idea what he was doing. He didn't know anything about raising kids, about school schedules, about what 8-year-old girls needed to be happy and healthy. But looking at Amy and Lucy sleeping peacefully for probably the first time in months, Robert knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let them down. Robert woke up at 5:30 a.m. out of habit, but instead of reaching for his coffee maker, he found himself listening to the soft breathing coming from his living room. For a moment, he had forgotten about the night before. Then reality came flooding back, along with a mixture of panic and determination that made his hands shake slightly. He had 2 children sleeping on his couch, 2 children who had been abandoned by the only adult they had left. 2 children who were now somehow his responsibility. Robert made his coffee quietly, trying not to wake Amy and Lucy. Through his kitchen window, the sun was just starting to paint the sky pink and gold. In a few hours, he would need to be at the factory for his shift. But first, he needed to figure out what to do with 2 8-year-old girls who had nowhere else to go. The smart thing would be to call social services. Let the professionals handle this. But Robert had grown up in foster care himself, bouncing from house to house until he aged out of the system at 18. He knew what happened to kids who got lost in the system, especially siblings who might get separated. He was stirring his coffee when he heard movement from the living room. Quiet whispers, then the soft sound of bare feet on his hardwood floor. Amy appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair messy from sleep, still wearing the oversized t-shirt he had given her the night before. We didn't mean to wake you up, she said softly. You didn't, Robert assured her. I always get up early. How did you sleep? Good, Amy said, but Robert could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She was probably wondering what came next, just like he was. Lucy appeared behind her sister, rubbing her eyes and holding her worn stuffed rabbit. In the morning light, Robert could see just how thin both girls were, how their clothes hung loose on their small frames. Are you hungry? He asked, already knowing the answer. Both girls nodded, and Robert realized he was going to need to go grocery shopping. His bachelor pantry wasn't equipped for feeding growing children. He had eggs, bread, and some fruit that was starting to go soft. It would have to do for now. While he cooked scrambled eggs, the girls sat at his kitchen table and talked in low voices. Robert caught fragments of their conversation. Amy was trying to comfort Lucy, who was worried about their few belongings back at Carol's apartment. Amy assured her that everything important was in their backpacks. Everything important? Robert asked gently. Amy nodded seriously. Our dad's watch and our mom's jewelry box. The pictures of our family. That's all we really need. Robert's throat tightened. These children had already learned to live with less than most adults could imagine. They had distilled their entire lives down to what could fit in 2 small backpacks. He served them breakfast and watched them eat with the same careful politeness they had shown the night before. They cleaned their plates completely and thanked him multiple times. When Lucy accidentally knocked over her orange juice, she immediately started crying and apologizing. "Hey, it's okay," Robert said quickly, grabbing a towel. "It's just juice. Accidents happen." But Lucy's reaction told him everything he needed to know about how mistakes were handled in Carol's house. Children who cried over spilled juice were children who had been punished for normal kid behavior. After breakfast, Robert sat down across from them at the table. "I need to ask you something important," he said. "Do you want to go to school today?" Amy and Lucy looked at each other. "Are we supposed to?" Amy asked. "Well, it's a school day," Robert said, "but I don't know if you're enrolled in the school near here or if your records are still at your old school." "Carol never sent us to school much," Lucy said quietly. She said it was too much trouble with all the paperwork and meetings. Robert felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "How long since you've been to school regularly?" "Since Daddy died," Amy said. "Carol said she would homeschool us, but mostly she just gave us workbooks and told us to stay quiet." 2 years. These children had been out of school for 2 years, living with a woman who couldn't be bothered to give them an education. Robert's hands clenched into fists under the table. "Well," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady, "we're going to fix that. But first I need to know something else. Do you want to stay here with me?" Amy's face was serious beyond her years. "Do you want us to stay?" "I asked you first," Robert said gently. The sisters looked at each other again, having one of those silent conversations that twins seem to specialize in. Finally, Amy spoke for both of them. "We don't have anywhere else to go," she said simply. "Carol made it pretty clear she doesn't want us back. And we don't have any other family." "That's not what I asked," Robert said. "I asked if you want to stay here." "With me?" Lucy spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Would you be nice to us?" The question broke Robert's heart. "Yes," he said firmly. "I would be very nice to you. I would take care of you and make sure you have everything you need." "Even if we're trouble sometimes?" Amy asked. "Especially if you're trouble sometimes," Robert said, and was rewarded with small smiles from both girls. That's what kids are supposed to be. A little bit of trouble. Amy reached over and took Lucy's hand. "We want to stay," she said. "If you really want us." Robert looked at these 2 brave, damaged children who had been let down by every adult in their lives, and felt something shift inside his chest. For 6 months he had been living like a ghost, going through the motions of life without really living. These girls needed someone to fight for them, to protect them, to give them the childhood they deserved. "I want you," he said, and meant it completely. "I want you to stay as long as you want to stay. This can be your home." Lucy started crying, but these were different tears than the spilled juice tears. "These were tears of relief, really?" she asked. "Really," Robert said. "We're going to be a family. It might be different from other families, and we're all going to have to learn as we go, but we're going to take care of each other." Amy wiped her sister's tears with her sleeve. "What about your job? What about when Carol comes back?" Robert looked out the window at the sunrise, pink and gold and full of possibility. "I'll figure out the job situation. And if Carol comes back, we'll deal with that too. But right now it's just us 3 and we're going to be okay." He called in sick to work that day, the first time he had used a sick day since Linda died. Instead, he spent the day learning about the girls' favorite foods, their fears, their dreams. He learned that Amy wanted to be a teacher when she grew up, and Lucy loved to draw. He learned that they both missed their father desperately and had never really grieved properly because Carol didn't like them to be sad. That night, as he tucked them into the couch again, Amy looked up at him with serious eyes. "Mr. Robert, are you going to be our dad now?" Robert sat down on the edge of the coffee table. "I'm going to be whatever you need me to be," he said. "If you want to call me Dad, that's okay. If you want to call me Robert, that's okay too. The important thing is that you're safe and loved." "I think I'd like to try calling you Dad," Lucy said shyly. "Me too," Amy agreed. "Then Dad it is," Robert said, and felt his broken heart start to heal for the first time in 6 months. Outside, the sun had set on his old life. Tomorrow he would figure out schools and legal guardianship and all the practical things that came with suddenly becoming a father. But tonight he was just a man who had found his purpose again in two small voices saying goodnight. The first month was like learning to speak a language Robert had never studied. Everything that seemed simple to other parents felt like navigating a maze in the dark. How much breakfast was enough? What time should 8-year-olds go to bed? How do you braid hair that tangles at the slightest touch? Robert's small apartment, which had felt too big in his loneliness, now felt like a puzzle with too many pieces. Amy and Lucy had been sharing the couch, insisting they were comfortable, but Robert could see them shifting restlessly at night. He spent his first paycheck after they arrived on bunk beds, spending an entire Saturday assembling them while the girls handed him screws and bolts like surgical assistants. "The top bunk is mine," Amy declared, then immediately looked worried. "If that's okay, I mean." "Of course it's okay," Robert said, tightening the last bolt. "This is your room now. You get to decide how you want it." Lucy ran her hands along the smooth wood of the bottom bunk. "I've never had my own bed before," she said softly. That night, Robert heard them giggling and whispering long after lights out, the sound of children who finally felt safe enough to act like children. He stood in the hallway listening, feeling a warmth in his chest that he had forgotten was possible. The practical challenges came fast and constant. Robert knew nothing about shopping for little girls. The grocery store became an adventure in trial and error. Amy liked crunchy peanut butter, but Lucy preferred smooth. They both loved oranges but hated bananas. Robert started keeping a notebook of their preferences, determined not to forget anything that mattered to them. Clothes were even more complicated. Robert stood in the girls' section of the department store feeling completely lost, holding up tiny sweaters and wondering how anyone figured out what size an 8-year-old wore. A helpful saleswoman took pity on him and taught him the basics, while Amy and Lucy tried on outfits with the serious concentration of professional shoppers. "You're doing great, honey," the saleswoman told him quietly while the girls were in the dressing room. "First time, Dad?" "Something like that," Robert said, not sure how to explain their situation. The legal aspects were even more overwhelming. Robert spent hours on the phone with social services, family court, and legal aid societies, trying to understand how to make his guardianship of the girls official. The system was designed for traditional families, not for situations like theirs. The caseworker who visited was kind but overworked, asking Robert dozens of questions about his background, his income, his intentions. "The girls seem happy and healthy," she told him after interviewing Amy and Lucy separately. "But you understand this is highly unusual. Typically, children in situations like this would be placed in foster care while we locate suitable relatives. These girls have been through enough," Robert said firmly. "They need stability, not more upheaval." What worried him most were the nightmares. Amy hid hers better, but Robert could hear her talking in her sleep, having conversations with her father, apologizing for things that weren't her fault. Lucy's were more obvious. She would wake up crying, calling for her dad, disoriented and scared. The first time it happened, Robert wasn't sure what to do. He stood outside their bedroom door listening to Lucy sob, afraid to intrude but unable to walk away. Finally, he knocked softly. "Lucy, can I come in?" She was sitting up in her bottom bunk, tears streaming down her face while Amy leaned over from the top bunk trying to comfort her. "Bad dream?" Robert asked gently. Lucy nodded, hiccuping. "I dreamed Daddy came back, but then he disappeared again." Robert sat on the edge of her bed. "That must have been scary." "I miss him so much," Lucy whispered. "Sometimes I forget he's gone, and then I remember and it hurts all over again." Robert knew that feeling intimately. "Missing someone you love never really stops hurting," he said, "but it does get easier to carry." He started a new routine after that. When the nightmares came, he would sit with whichever girl needed him, not trying to fix anything or make the pain go away, just being present. Sometimes they talked about their father, and Robert learned about a man who had read bedtime stories in funny voices and taught them to whistle and never missed their school plays. "He would have liked you," Amy told Robert one night after a particularly bad dream. "Daddy always said the best people are the ones who help when they don't have to." School became their biggest victory and their biggest challenge. Getting Amy and Lucy enrolled took weeks of paperwork and meetings. They were behind academically after 2 years of irregular education, but they were hungry to learn. Robert hired a tutor for the evenings, a retired teacher named Mrs. Henderson, who was patient with their gaps in knowledge and amazed by their eagerness to catch up. "These girls are bright," she told Robert. They just need time and consistency. Time and consistency. Robert could give them that. The apartment slowly transformed from a bachelor's space into a family home. Children's drawings appeared on the refrigerator. Books and backpacks claimed space on the kitchen counter. The bathroom sink was always cluttered with hair clips and toothbrushes. Robert had never realized how quiet his life had been until it was filled with the constant, cheerful chaos of two growing girls. Money was tight, tighter than it had ever been. Robert picked up overtime shifts whenever he could, but childcare costs ate into everything. He learned to clip coupons to shop sales to make meals stretch further. Amy and Lucy never complained, even when dinner was pasta for the fourth night in a row. "We used to eat the same thing every day at Carol's house," Amy told him when she noticed him apologizing for their repetitive meals. "Usually just cereal or crackers. This is like having a fancy restaurant." The hardest part wasn't the money or the logistics or even the legal complications. The hardest part was learning to trust that this was real, that it was going to last. All three of them were waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to decide this arrangement wasn't working. Robert caught himself watching for signs that the girls were unhappy, that they might want to leave. Amy and Lucy were constantly looking for evidence that Robert was getting tired of them, that he might send them away like Carol had. It was Lucy who finally broke the pattern. About 6 weeks after they had moved in, she came home from school with a permission slip for a field trip. "I need a parent or guardian to sign this," she said, holding out the paper hesitantly. Robert took the form and signed it without hesitation. "Dad," he wrote in the guardian's signature line, and something settled into place for all of them. "You really mean it," Lucy said. Not a question, but a statement of wonder. "I really mean it," Robert confirmed. "This is your home and I'm your dad, and that's not going to change." That night, for the first time since they had arrived, both girls slept through the night without nightmares. And Robert, listening to the peaceful quiet of his full house, slept better than he had since Linda died. They were becoming a family, one small piece at a time. 3 months into their new life together, Robert thought they had found their rhythm. Amy was thriving in school, finally caught up with her grade level and making friends. Lucy had discovered a talent for art, covering their refrigerator with colorful drawings of their small family. Robert had gotten used to the sound of laughter in his apartment, to helping with homework at the kitchen table, to reading bedtime stories in voices that made both girls giggle. Then, Carol came back. The knock on the door came on a Tuesday evening while Robert was helping Lucy with her math homework and Amy was practicing reading aloud. It was the same sharp, impatient knock that had started everything 3 months ago, but this time it filled Robert with dread instead of curiosity. Through the peephole, he saw Carol standing in the hallway, but she looked different. Her hair was styled differently. She was wearing expensive clothes he hadn't seen before, and she had a nervous energy about her that reminded Robert of someone preparing for a performance. "Girls, go to your room for a few minutes," Robert said quietly. Amy's face went pale. She had recognized the knock too. "Is that her?" "Just go to your room. Everything's going to be okay." But as Robert opened the door, he wasn't sure that was true. Carol's smile was the same artificial brightness he remembered, but now it was amplified. "Robert, you look great. This arrangement has really worked out well, hasn't it?" She tried to step into the apartment, but Robert didn't move aside. "What do you want, Carol?" "I want my girls back, of course." She laughed like this was obvious. "I told you this was temporary. I'm settled now, ready to be a proper family again." "Where have you been for 3 months?" Carol waved a hand dismissively. "Getting my life sorted out. I met someone wonderful, actually. David has a beautiful house in the suburbs, great schools nearby. The girls are going to love it." Robert felt cold certainty settle in his stomach. This wasn't about missing the children. This was about something else entirely. "They're happy here," Robert said firmly. "They're in school, they have friends, they're thriving." "And I'm grateful," Carol said, her voice taking on that rehearsed quality again. "You've done a wonderful job as a babysitter." "But they're not your children, Robert. They're mine, legally, and I want them back." From their bedroom, Robert could hear muffled voices. Amy and Lucy were having an urgent, whispered conversation, probably pressed against the door trying to hear what was happening. "Have you thought about what they want?" Robert asked. Carol's smile faltered slightly. "They're 8 years old. They don't know what they want. They need structure, stability, a proper family environment." They have that here. With a single man who works at a factory? Carol's voice sharpened. Please. David is a successful businessman. He can provide things you never could. Private schools, nice clothes, opportunities. Robert studied her face and saw what he had missed before. Desperation, but not the desperation of a mother missing her children. This was the desperation of someone who needed those children for reasons that had nothing to do with love. This David, Robert said slowly. Does he know about the girls? Of course he knows about them. He's very excited to meet them. And he knows they've been living with me for 3 months. He knows you abandoned them? Carol's composure cracked. I didn't abandon them. I made a temporary arrangement with a neighbor. There's a big difference. Is there? Robert kept his voice calm, but inside he was fighting a war between rage and fear. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you dumped 2 hungry, scared children on a stranger's doorstep and disappeared. You don't understand the situation, Carol snapped. David and I are getting married. He thinks having the girls around will make us look more stable, more family-oriented. It's important for his business image. There it was, the truth that Robert had been dreading. Carol didn't want Amy and Lucy back because she loved them or missed them. She wanted them back because they were useful to her new relationship. I want to see them, Carol continued. I want to talk to them about coming home. No, Robert said. Carol's face hardened. Excuse me? I said no. You're not taking them anywhere. I don't think you understand. I have legal rights here. I'm their guardian, are you? Robert asked. Because I've been to family court. I've talked to social workers. Abandoning children for 3 months doesn't exactly strengthen your legal position. For the first time, Carol looked uncertain. You can't keep them from me. They're my responsibility. They stopped being your responsibility the minute you walked away from them, Robert said. They're my family now. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of a door opening. Amy appeared in the hallway, her face set with a determination that looked far too old for her 8 years. We heard, she said simply. Lucy appeared beside her sister, holding her stuffed rabbit and looking terrified. Carol's face brightened artificially. Girls, look how much you've grown. I've missed you so much. Neither Amy nor Lucy moved toward her. They stood close to Robert, a united front. We don't want to go with you, Amy said quietly but clearly. Carol's smile wavered. Sweetheart, you don't understand. I have a new house, a new family for us. You'll have your own rooms, new clothes, everything you could want. We have everything we want here, Lucy said, her voice barely audible but firm. Your children, Carol said, her voice getting sharper. You don't get to decide where you live. Actually, Robert said, they do get a say. Any family court judge is going to want to hear what they want. Carol looked between Robert and the girls, and for a moment her mask slipped completely. Robert saw frustration, anger, and something that looked almost like hatred. This isn't over, she said finally. I'll be back with legal papers. David has connections, good lawyers. You can't steal someone else's children and expect to get away with it. I didn't steal anyone, Robert said quietly. I just didn't abandon them. After Carol left, the apartment felt like it was holding its breath. Amy and Lucy stood close to Robert, both of them shaking slightly. Is she going to make us go with her? Lucy asked. Robert knelt down so he was at their eye level. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen. But I need you to know that this might get complicated and it might take a while to sort out. We want to stay here, Amy said fiercely. This is our home. You're our dad. And you're my daughters, Robert said. We're going to fight this together, okay? That night, neither girl slept well. Robert could hear them whispering in their room, probably scared that they would wake up to find Carol dragging them away. He stayed up late researching family law, calling legal aid organizations, trying to figure out how to protect the children who had become his whole world. The next morning, he called in sick to work and took Amy and Lucy to see a family lawyer. The consultation was expensive, money Robert didn't really have, but the lawyer was honest about their situation. You're in a difficult position, she told him, but the fact that she abandoned them for 3 months combined with the children's clear preference to stay with you gives us some leverage. It's going to be a fight, though. I'm ready to fight, Robert said, looking at Amy and Lucy sitting beside him in the lawyer's office. Holding hands and trying to be brave, Carol had come back into their lives like a storm, threatening to destroy the family they had built. But storms pass, and Robert was determined that when this one was over, His daughters would still be home where they belonged. The family court building felt like a fortress designed to intimidate anyone who walked through its doors. Robert adjusted his tie for the 10th time as he sat in the hallway with Amy and Lucy, waiting for their case to be called. He had bought his only suit for Linda's funeral and hadn't worn it since. The girls were dressed in their best clothes, the nice dresses they had gotten for school pictures, their hair carefully braided. Across the hallway, Carol sat with a man Robert assumed was David and a lawyer in an expensive suit. David looked exactly like Robert had imagined, polished, confident, the kind of man who was used to getting what he wanted. Carol kept glancing over at Amy and Lucy with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Are you scared?" Lucy whispered, holding Robert's hand so tightly it almost hurt. "A little," Robert admitted. "But scared doesn't mean we give up. It just means this matters a lot to us." Amy hadn't spoken much that morning. She had been quiet and serious, like she was preparing for battle. Robert wished he could promise her that everything would work out, but he had learned that children who had been disappointed by adults could sense false reassurance from a mile away. Their lawyer, Ms. Peterson, had prepared them as well as she could. She had explained that Carol did have legal standing as the girls' guardian, but that her abandonment of them weakened her position significantly. The judge would consider what was in the best interests of the children, which included their own preferences, their current stability, and the quality of care they were receiving. The other side is going to try to make this about money and traditional family structures, Ms. Peterson had warned them. They'll argue that a married couple with financial resources is automatically better for the children than a single man with a factory job. But that's not true, Amy had said immediately. "No, it's not," Ms. Peterson agreed. "And that's what we're going to prove." When their case was finally called, they filed into a courtroom that felt both too big and too small. The judge was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. She looked at the assembled group with the weary patience of someone who had seen too many families torn apart by adults who had forgotten that children weren't possessions to be fought. Carol's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of a devoted stepmother who had been forced to make a difficult temporary arrangement due to circumstances beyond her control. He talked about David's successful business, their plans for marriage, the opportunities they could provide. He made Carol sound like a victim of bad timing, and Robert sound like an interfering stranger who had overstepped his bounds. "Ms. Williams has been the girl's guardian for 2 years," he said smoothly. "She has every legal right to determine where and how they live. Mr. Mitchell may have good intentions, but intentions don't replace legal authority or the stability of a traditional family unit." When it was Ms. Peterson's turn, she stood up with a stack of papers and a quiet confidence that made Robert feel hopeful for the first time all week. "Your Honor, the evidence tells a very different story," she began. "Ms. Williams didn't make a temporary arrangement. She abandoned 2 8-year-old children at a stranger's door at 11 o'clock at night, with no warning, no preparation, and no plan for their care. She presented documentation that painted a clear picture of Carol's neglect. School records showing that Amy and Lucy had missed most of the previous 2 years of education, medical records showing they had been underweight, and showing signs of poor nutrition when they started seeing Robert's doctor. Testimony from neighbors who had heard Carol yelling at the children and threatening to get rid of them. Furthermore, Ms. Peterson continued, Mr. Mitchell has not only provided excellent care for these children, he has helped them thrive. They are now caught up academically, they have gained healthy weight, and they have formed strong, loving bonds with him and their new community. The parade of witnesses felt like watching his life unfold in front of strangers. Mrs. Henderson, the tutor, testified about the girls' academic progress and their obvious happiness. Amy and Lucy's teachers spoke about their improvement in school and their frequent mentions of their dad, Robert. Dr. Williams, their pediatrician, presented evidence of their improved physical and emotional health. Even Mrs. Garcia from the apartment downstairs testified. "I hear them laughing all the time now," she told the judge. "Before, when they lived with that woman, there was only yelling and crying. Now there's music and games and the sounds of a happy family." But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Sarah Chen, a social worker who had been assigned to check on Amy and Lucy during their first month with Robert, had continued to monitor their situation informally. "In 20 years of child welfare work," she told the judge, I have rarely seen such a dramatic positive change in children's well-being. When I first met Amy and Lucy, they were withdrawn, anxious, and clearly traumatized. They are now confident, happy children who feel secure and loved. When Carol took the stand, her polished facade began to crack under Ms. Peterson's gentle but persistent questioning. You left the children with Mr. Mitchell at 11 p.m. with no advance notice, correct? It was an emergency situation. I had to leave for a job opportunity. What was the nature of this emergency? It was a career opportunity that couldn't wait. And this opportunity required you to leave that very night? Carol hesitated. David and we needed time to plan our future together. So you left the children because your boyfriend didn't want them around while you planned your relationship? That's taking it out of context. Ms. Williams, in the 3 months you were gone, how many times did you call to check on the children? Silence. How many times did you send money for their care? More silence. Did you provide Mr. Mitchell with any medical information, school records, or emergency contacts for the children? I assumed he would figure it out, Carol said weakly. When David took the stand, his testimony revealed more than he probably intended. Yes, he wanted to marry Carol. Yes, he thought having children around would be good for his image as a family man. No, he had never met Amy and Lucy. No, he hadn't been aware that Carol had left them with a neighbor for 3 months. You want to become the guardian of 2 children you've never met? Ms. Peterson asked. I'm sure we'll get along fine, David said with the confidence of someone who had never dealt with real children. Finally, it was time for Amy and Lucy to speak. The judge had arranged for them to talk to her privately in her chambers, but they asked if Robert could come too. I want to hear from you girls about what you want, the judge said gently. You can take your time and you can say anything you need to say. Amy, always the spokesperson, took a deep breath. We want to stay with Dad Robert, she said clearly. He takes care of us and loves us and makes us feel safe. Can you tell me what it was like living with Ms. Williams? The judge asked. Amy and Lucy exchanged a look. She didn't like us very much, Lucy said softly. She said we were too much trouble and cost too much money. What about now? What's it like living with Mr. Mitchell? He makes us breakfast every morning, Amy said. And he helps us with our homework. And when we have bad dreams about Daddy, he sits with us until we feel better. He reads us stories in funny voices, Lucy added. And he says we're the best thing that ever happened to him. The judge was quiet for a moment. And you both feel the same way? You both want to stay with Mr. Mitchell? Both girls nodded without hesitation. When they returned to the courtroom, the judge didn't take long to make her decision. This case presents us with a situation where legal guardianship and the best interests of the children are not aligned, she began. While Ms. Williams does have legal standing as the children's guardian, her actions over the past several months demonstrate a clear pattern of neglect and abandonment. Robert held his breath. Mr. Mitchell has provided excellent care for these children during a period when their legal guardian chose not to do so. The children are thriving in his care and have expressed a clear preference to remain with him. Carol's lawyer started to object, but the judge held up her hand. Furthermore, the court is concerned about Ms. Williams' motivations for seeking to regain custody at this time, which appear to be related to her relationship status rather than genuine concern for the children's welfare. The judge looked directly at Amy and Lucy. I want you girls to know that the court's primary concern is what's best for you. And based on everything I've heard today, what's best for you is to remain in the care of Mr. Mitchell. Robert felt his knees go weak with relief. Therefore, I'm awarding full legal guardianship of Amy and Lucy Williams to Robert Mitchell, effective immediately. The gavel came down like a thunderclap of justice. Amy and Lucy threw themselves into Robert's arms, crying and laughing at the same time. Across the courtroom, Carol was arguing furiously with her lawyer while David looked like he couldn't wait to escape. It's over, Robert whispered into his daughter's hair. You're home. You're really, truly home. Outside the courthouse with legal papers that made their family official, Robert knelt down and looked at Amy and Lucy seriously. I want you to know something, he said. I didn't fight for you because I thought I could give you more things or a fancier house. I fought for you because you're my daughters and I love. 2 years after the courtroom victory that made their family official, Robert stood in the same kitchen where his lonely journey had begun. But everything about it was different now. The morning sun streamed through windows decorated with Lucy's latest artwork, and the sound of running water from the bathroom meant Amy was getting ready for school. The coffee maker gurgled to life, but now it was making enough for 3 people, not just one person drinking for 2 out of habit. "Dad, have you seen my math homework?" Lucy called from the bedroom she now shared with Amy by choice, not necessity. They had the option of separate rooms, but the twins preferred each other's company, especially during thunderstorms and on nights when memories of their father visited their dreams. "Did you check your backpack?" Robert called back, spreading peanut butter on toast with the practiced efficiency of someone who had packed thousands of school lunches. "Found it." Lucy emerged with her long hair in the crooked braids she insisted on doing herself, carrying a folder decorated with her characteristic bright drawings. At 10 years old, she had discovered a talent for art that amazed her teachers and filled their apartment with color. Amy appeared moments later, her hair neatly combed and her school clothes organized with the precision she brought to everything. She had inherited her father's methodical nature, but where his had been born of loneliness, hers came from a genuine love of order and planning. She wanted to be a teacher, she had announced last month, specifically a teacher for kids who had been through hard times. Mrs. Peterson said the adoption papers should be finalized next week, Amy said matter-of-factly as she gathered her books. The legal guardianship had been the first step, but Robert had wanted to make it even more permanent. He wanted Amy and Lucy to be his daughters in every way the law allowed. "How do you feel about that?" Robert asked, though he knew the answer. They had talked about the adoption many times, but he wanted to make sure the girls understood what it meant. "It means you'll be our dad forever," Lucy said, stealing a piece of his toast. "Even more than you already are." "It means we'll be the Mitchell family officially," Amy added with satisfaction. "And no one can ever change that." Robert smiled, watching his daughters prepare for their day with the confidence of children who knew they were loved unconditionally. The transformation from the scared, hungry girls who had arrived at his door was so complete that sometimes it felt like a miracle. The apartment had transformed too. What had once been a neat, quiet space organized around one person's simple needs was now cheerfully chaotic with the debris of family life. Homework assignments covered the kitchen table. Art supplies claimed half the living room. Books were stacked everywhere because both girls had inherited Robert's love of reading. The refrigerator was covered with school photos, report cards, and Lucy's endless artistic creations. Amy's latest report card was particularly impressive. Not only had she caught up academically, she was now at the top of her class. Her teacher had recommended her for the gifted program, and Amy was considering it with the careful thought she brought to all decisions. "I want to stay in regular classes," she had told Robert last week. "I think I can help other kids who are struggling." I remember what it felt like to be behind. Lucy's path was different but equally remarkable. Her art teacher had entered one of her paintings in a citywide elementary school competition, and it had won second place. The painting showed a small house with warm yellow windows and 3 stick figures holding hands in front of it. When asked to title it, Lucy had written "My Family" in her careful 10-year-old handwriting. The legal battles were completely behind them now. Carol had not appealed the custody decision, perhaps realizing that her relationship with David wouldn't survive the scrutiny of a prolonged court case. Robert had heard through neighborhood gossip that she had moved to another state, but he felt no curiosity about her new life. She had made her choice when she knocked on his door that night, and he had made his when he opened it. What mattered now was the life they had built together. Robert had been promoted to shift supervisor at the factory, a position that came with better pay and more reasonable hours. For the first time since Linda's death, money wasn't a constant worry. They could afford small luxuries now: pizza on Friday nights, occasional movies, the art supplies that Lucy went through like other kids went through candy. More importantly, they could afford to dream. Amy talked about college with the assumption that it would happen, not the fear that it might not. Lucy planned elaborate art projects with the confidence of someone who had always been encouraged to create. Robert found himself thinking about the future in terms of graduations and weddings and grandchildren, possibilities that had seemed impossible during those months of grinding loneliness. The hardest days were still the ones that reminded them of loss. Father's Day was complicated for Amy and Lucy, a day of missing their biological father while celebrating the man who had chosen to become their dad. Robert navigated it carefully, helping them honor their father's memory while building new traditions of their own. "I think Daddy would be happy that we found you," Lucy had said last Father's Day, and Robert had to step outside for a moment to compose himself. The anniversary of their father's death each year brought a different kind of sadness. The grief that never fully disappears but learns to coexist with joy. Robert had learned to recognize the signs, the quiet days when both girls seemed distant, the extra nightmares, the way they held hands more often. He had learned to be present for their grief without trying to fix it, understanding that healing wasn't about forgetting but about carrying love and loss together. On those difficult days, they looked through the photo albums Amy and Lucy had rescued from their old life. Pictures of their parents when they were young and happy. Photos of birthday parties and family vacations and ordinary moments that had become precious because they were all that remained. Robert encouraged these memory sessions, understanding that his daughters needed to remember where they came from even as they built something new. "We're lucky," Amy had said during one of these photo sessions. "Most kids only get one dad, but we got two. We got Daddy who loved us first, and we got you who saved us." The transformation in Robert himself was just as dramatic as the changes in Amy and Lucy. The man who had sat alone at his kitchen table, drowning in grief and loneliness, was gone. In his place was someone with purpose, someone whose life had meaning beyond just getting through each day. He laughed more in a single week now than he had in the entire year after Linda's death. He had started volunteering at a local organization that helped children in foster care, using his experience to advocate for kids who were lost in the system. It was difficult work seeing children who reminded him of Amy and Lucy in those early days, but it was also deeply meaningful. He and the girls volunteered together sometimes, packing care packages or helping with holiday parties. "Everyone should have what we have," Lucy had said during one of these volunteer sessions, and Robert realized his daughters were learning that their happiness came with a responsibility to help others find the same thing. The apartment felt full in ways that had nothing to do with physical space. Conversations happened over every meal. Homework time was collaborative, with Robert helping Amy with her advanced math while Lucy practiced reading aloud. Evenings were spent on the couch together, watching movies or playing board games or just talking about their days. Even the silence was different now. Instead of the oppressive quiet of isolation, their apartment had the comfortable quiet of people who enjoyed each other's company. Robert could work on his own projects while the girls did homework. All of them together but engaged in their own activities, secure in the knowledge that they were part of something bigger than themselves. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility. Amy was already talking about high school courses and college applications with the confidence of someone who had never doubted that her education would continue. Lucy was planning an art portfolio for her applications to a specialized arts high school. Robert was considering going back to school himself, maybe studying education so he could work with kids who needed advocates. Sometimes, usually late at night after the girls were asleep, Robert thought about the chain of events that had brought them together. If Linda hadn't died, if Carol hadn't been desperate to escape her responsibilities, if Robert hadn't been lonely enough to say yes to an impossible request, none of this would have happened. It was a strange thing to be grateful for tragedy, but Robert had learned that sometimes the worst things lead to the best things, in ways that make no sense until much later. He kept a photo on his dresser of Linda next to a recent picture of him with Amy and Lucy. Sometimes he talked to Linda's picture, telling her about the girls' latest achievements, their funny observations, their plans for the future. He liked to think she would have loved them as much as he did, that she would have been proud of the family they had become. "Thank you," he whispered to her picture sometimes, though he wasn't sure what he was thanking her for. For loving him enough that he knew how to love again? For dying in a way that left him open to the possibility of a different kind of family? For teaching him,